Well, welcome, Will. I'm so glad to have Will Straughan from Soundcheck here today to talk to us. And for those of you who don't know, who are listening, Will has been here along with his colleagues working with our students this week. And I can't wait to hear more about the work you do and your time here on campus working with our students. So tell us a little bit about the work Soundcheck does. I know you said you are located in Nashville or home based in Nashville, but that you work all over. So tell us a little bit more about Soundcheck.
I will. Yeah. Thanks, Avery. And thanks, Brookstone, for having Soundcheck here. So we're Soundcheck Prevention Network. We're a 501c3. I live in Nashville, North Carolina. I'm the founder and CEO, so that's why we're based there. But we have staff that live elsewhere in the country. My colleague that's with me here lives just outside of Georgia. She lives in Roswell, Georgia. Okay. So, we're a substance misuse prevention organization, and we were cut from the cloth of an organization that enabled us to go around teaching substance misuse prevention classes to over 100 schools in 20 countries.
Oh, wow.
So we learned the ropes about what are ways to talk about substances to families, to educators, and to kids in ways that are relevant and resonate with the particular communities where we work. We also have learned and been trained to integrate our stories. We're in recovery from substance use disorder. I have been in recovery for going on 17 years from alcohol, marijuana, or cannabis. We'll kind of refer to it as cannabis, nicotine, and other substances. I've been in recovery for coming up on 17 years. So we sort of integrate our stories with the facts to elevate the way they resonate, especially with kids, and then help parents and educators understand the power they have as adults. So first of all, to feel empowered, but to understand the power they have to influence their kids in the healthiest ways. So
that's great.
That's kind of our background. I think what separates Soundcheck is one of the shortcomings we've noticed kind of in prevention is that 4 days of education or 5 days just teaching the facts is not enough.
Right.
That we want to help schools have systemic change, or for them to understand how their culture, what the risks and protections in their particular culture are, and we love to support them in any way possible to enable kids. Basically, we talk about pushing them in the direction of the healthier choice, and for us,
that's a great way to say it.
We always are trying to tip the scales towards kids making the healthier choice, and parents and educators understanding how they can model those behaviors as well.
That's awesome. Because I do think often parents don't feel empowered. They don't know the influence they have on their children's decision making. And so I love that y'all are here, and I love that we got to meet with you guys as parents yesterday. But tell us about, you've been here before. This is not your first time here at Brookstone. So tell us a little bit about the work you've seen, or first of all, the work you're doing with our students, what this week has looked like for you, but also how you've seen it over several years coming here.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'll start with the bigger picture, because having been here previously with another organization, Brookstone was a school I would go home to and tell my family and friends. I was like, I really like this school down there. I went to Woodbury Forest, which is in Virginia. So 3 of my best friends from there are from here.
Yeah. Oh,
and
fun.
So to get to work here was really interesting, because I always just felt like I connected well with the community, and it's just a respectful, welcoming community. And so coming back here several years after having started Soundcheck, and this being our first year, it was really awesome to see that my beliefs of this, or my memory of this place, holds true. And so I spent a lot of time asking faculty and students what makes this place special. And the number one word that the students came up with is community and trust. And the number one word that faculty came up with was family. And so there's just a strong backbone here of support for one another and being a welcoming environment. So it was nice to see that. So kind of just to share that long view,
I love that.
it is, those are really important factors in supporting kids making healthier choices and kind of navigating what are pretty difficult years as teenagers. This particular week, what we've been asked to do here at Soundcheck is primarily student education with some adult and faculty education. And so my colleague's been meeting with middle school students, and I've been doing intensive education with the 10th graders. So I've had 7 classes a day, getting to cover all of the 10th graders, seeing them 4 different times throughout the week. So everyone has had 4 different sessions. And we again, like our approach is to, rather than just throw a bunch of prevention facts at them, we actually ask them to kind of get grounded in who they are. So we have some worksheets where they can kind of talk about what are the things that they love, what makes them them, and what are the things that define them and make them feel whole and joyful and connected. And then through that lens, once we've kind of established sort of a comfort level with them, recognizing what they value in life, then we are able to kind of consider choices, facts around substances like alcohol, nicotine, marijuana, and other drugs. We're able to consider those in ways that feel relevant and personal to them so that they feel, again, empowered to make the healthier choice. If they have tried substances or are using them currently, maybe they want to gravitate more towards the healthier version of themselves, or if they've chosen to abstain from substance use, which is very common. We know that the majority of 10th graders in the United States have not used alcohol, have not had a full drink of alcohol, so that's always a good thing.
Yeah.
We want kids to feel to reinforced in that decision as well.
Right. Wow. So you have gotten to know our students pretty well then over this week.
I'm getting pretty good at their names. So yeah, and I'm a musician too, so that's why the name Soundcheck, just as a little bit of background. When I started Soundcheck, I wanted it to not be, and this is nothing against any and all, including myself, who have tried to make an impact with prevention, but I didn't want it to be like a scare tactic program or say drugs are bad or for it to be only about people who don't use substances or only about people who do. I wanted to be and kind of include everybody. And so I asked a young graduate student who was in business school what she thought the name should be. And she said, well, I think it should be Soundcheck because you are a musician. You said you wanted this organization to be about listening and learning before lecturing.
Oh, I love that.
And she said, I'm also in recovery from alcoholism, and I just wish that more people had talked about this openly when I was in high school. So that's sort of the ethos that we as an organization and the way we approach this topic is it's your health, it's your well-being. We should talk openly about a stigmatized topic.
Right.
And you mentioned the difficulty parents have and faculty sometimes too. It is a hard topic. And so, and it's not really going to get necessarily easier, but if we keep kind of staying with it, we develop a practice of revisiting this conversation as our kids kind of move through their developmental years.
Right. Well, I love how you say you talked about them learning about themselves and identifying their passions. Why is that important in this context?
Yeah, I think when you look at science in general and the choices you and I make today in this room as adults, but in general, certainly for young people too, the facts about just what might be in that drug or the sugar that might be in or the calories that might be in that food, whatever risk or choice that it is we might make, those are not really shown to be the deciding factor in whether somebody uses a substance or makes a choice that they do. It typically is whether or not it lines up with their values of who they are and who they want to be. And so it's a balance of those two, not only providing the facts, but also allowing them to dial into who and what they recognize in themselves so they can kind of we talk a lot about sort of measuring the cost benefit or the risk reward of those two things. So I think to plant the seed or to have a firm foundation in the person that they are scientifically is shown to be that intrinsic motivation is often more important than just the external facts coming in.
That's so interesting.
Did that answer that clearly?
I think that's well, trying to think of how as parents, again, the tools that we can give both our students to make these decisions, but our parents in helping to educate their students. I just find that very interesting is teaching them more about who they are and what they're passionate about and how that plays into this. I think that's very unique or interesting to me. So, because as I was telling you before we started, this whole world is constantly changing of what we need to know as parents and how different it may be from when we grew up. And so trying to give our students and our parents these toolboxes, and I use that word because Lee used this word yesterday. So what would be a toolbox that we are trying to give our kids as they are navigating these decisions? Or what would be some of the tools in the toolbox, I should say? Yeah,
that's a great question. And just to validate, yes, it is a changing world that we're as prevention specialists trying to keep up with all the time with the advent of new formulas of the same substances that have been around for a long time, and sometimes just brand new substances on the scene. So it can be really tricky. Some of the tips in the toolbox, I'm trying to think of some of the questions that the students asked. So one of them at the beginning of the week, I just had them submit questions on a note card, was how do you, if all of your friends are going out and they're drinking one night, like how do you kind of separate yourself from that, whether or not you have partaken in that behavior or not, but like if the choice you want to make that night is to not drink, how do you separate that? And so the tool that, I mean, I usually ask the students what their opinion is, and their answer to that was, well, you can just directly say, like, I'm not going to be doing that tonight, or I don't really feel like doing that. And so giving kind of kids permission to speak their mind. And then there is a sort of normative belief, and it's false. So we tend to believe that, like, if we do something, people are going to disapprove. Right. If we stand up for ourselves, or if we stick out from the norm. That's a really scary thing for a human being to not do what other people are doing. Kids feel that like a million times more than we do. Right. And so one of the things we'll do in the way, like a discussion-based classroom, is by asking kids what they think, they get to hear each other say, I would not be upset if my friend chose to make kind of a different decision that night. And so that reinforces some openness around the conversation and normalizes that healthier choice. Right. That's awesome. So that's one tool, is just using some social norms to do that, and normalizing that option. Yeah, I'm sure it's helpful for them to hear from each other. That's fantastic. So, because you've been working in small groups, like with these students, so it's not just like a lecture with all 70 of them in there and things like, y'all have been able to break down in small groups. Yes, it is. Yeah. And that, like, sort of sparking that conversation, we've done this enough to where we know when it's time to lecture and kind of get the information in there. Because there are students who really respond, like, I want to know what fentanyl is. I want to know what the history of opioids are in our country. Yeah, so that's important. And then it's important to kind of put the ball in their court and let them have some small group discussions and kind of bring it back to the larger group. That's awesome. All right, well, so bigger picture, what are the 4 main things that we are looking at drugs-wise that we need to know about as parents? I mean, there are a lot more than 4, but 4 major things that we need to know about. The things to look out for most often, just to start kind of with, again, the question kids ask me is, what's the worst drug? And we don't really use language like that, good, bad. We're careful to talk about substances more in terms of risk. So how risky is that? Is that extremely highly risky? Is that lower risk? Is there a risk to taking an Advil? It's pretty low, but for some of us with stomach problems, it might not be the best thing. So, so just sort of framing things in those terms, students, things to be on the lookout for is that which is normalized. So students ask what the worst substance is, and typically, and I'm not trying to be snarky, but one way to answer that question is the worst substance is the one you can get. So that which is most within reach and normalized, typically is going to be the most harmful, because that's the one that we can kind of, as a society, we might forgive, or as a culture or community, we might sort of treat as normal. And you can probably imagine, like, alcohol. We tend to, sometimes we have to just point out that is a drug, that is a substance. We don't, most adults in the United States who do use alcohol don't have a substance use disorder. So we don't ever shame adult use of alcohol, nor even adolescent use. We would never shame it. So I think it's those things which are normalized and within reach. And so, and also when there's a really rigorous prevention culture, which there is, we like at Brookstone, that the school throughout the years and changes of leadership has been really committed and I think consistent to strong prevention programs, not just of substance use, but maintaining dialogue, and the implementation of testing, which a lot of schools do, I think has a lot of value, as long as it's part of a bigger conversation and it doesn't like add permissibility to alcohol. So, or it doesn't allow us to overlook that. So that's one thing, is like what's normal and kind of paying attention to that alcohol culture. So I'll stop there if you have any questions there, and I can share a couple other things that stand out. Well, when you use the word, I mean, I have a million questions that are going through my head, but like,
when you look at normalization of something like marijuana, shifting from alcohol to marijuana, how confused are our children in the sense that, well, it's legal here, and does legal mean safe? Versus, I feel like that whole conversation is changing. And I do think they're confused because I think adults are confused on what, especially as I said, all the different types and all the different things that are available that are legal versus illegal. And anyway, so when you have an atmosphere or an environment that there's a whole range of permissibility and availability, how do you educate then the safest, riskiest choices? I don't even know if I'm making sense when I'm asking that question, but I believe that our children can be very confused because when they're like, well, if it's legal, it must be safe. And that can be alcohol or that can be cannabis.
Yes. And nicotine.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So one sort of big picture way we will talk about it, and this hasn't come up this week, but it's fairly common. We teach all around the world, but even in the United States, kids and adults will often attribute the quote unquote European model of drinking as more responsible or better. And that's not been proven to be true. So
That's interesting.
Data show that students in countries where the drinking age is lower tend to binge drink more often and have more negative consequences and physical problems due to alcohol use. So it doesn't engender like more responsible use necessarily to have the law is lower to be normalized or in the culture. So that's kind of one bigger picture in terms of the law. Another way we will frame that is alcohol affect a 16-year-old body different in the United States than it does in Italy? And it's like, it doesn't matter what border any of us crosses. The substance is going to have the same effect regardless of what the law is. I mean, assuming it's the same substance and potency. So the law is like an important sort of marker in different places we go, but ultimately it's the substance itself and who we are and our biological and our genetic kind of makeup that really needs to inform the decision we make around that. So another big thing and another thing that's related to what you're asking about in terms of like, how do we talk about stuff that is legal is like we all have different genetic backgrounds. And so I have, I'm biological male who has biological first degree relative males who are, who struggled with addiction and are luckily made it into recovery like I did. But that increased my chances like sevenfold of developing addiction. And so, everybody's going to have a different response. So kind of being aware as a parent is like, how does my kid respond to different stimuli? Are they impulsive? Even before they drink are important things to keep in mind. So laws matter. But the substance itself and our backgrounds, and the frequency with which they're done obviously play a big role as well. So I'm getting a little bit lost. I'm trailing off there.
No. I think that is also important. So let's shift gears to like, I want to ask like about fentanyl. Tell us what that is. Tell us what it's in and what's the risk to our children in trying things that they may not know that that's even in there.
Yeah. So this was a question that came up today. We did a lot of specific education with the 10th graders around questions they had about drugs, whether someone were like, tell us more about THC, marijuana.
Yes.
And fentanyl came up a lot. And so fentanyl is a synthetic opioid. And so like backing up to what opioids are in general, we release them naturally in our body, so endogenously, and we have sort of endogenous morphine in our body called endorphins. It's a beautiful thing. We try to teach kids to tap into those natural highs. So when they run, when they do things that are fun, when they connect with their family, a lot of kids talked about their faith and their spirituality, like those moments of them like making music, all of those sort of release these happy chemicals in us naturally. So does opium. So opium is a substance that comes from poppy seeds. And then through the history of time, there were many wars fought over that. I know you're not asking this, but I'm still giving this.
I love the history of it.
This helps us like think about how substances are marketed and how they
Right.
make their way through history and intermingle with our lives.
Yes.
But morphine was synthesized through opium and was really helpful to, especially for people coming back who are amputees from coming back from wars. But that was sold legally in grocery stores, and then heroin was synthesized from that as a non-addictive substance.
Really?
And it turned out it was very addictive. And
not
so
know
since
that.
then, different medications have come out. So the medical community is almost always looking for what is that thing that will help us feel better without
Right.
causing problems. And so there are pills that many of us may be prescribed after surgery, like Percocet,
Right.
Oxycontin, which is a continuous release of a synthetic version of heroin, that are helpful in relieving pain, but can also be rapidly addicting. Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid that is used medicinally, medically in hospitals safely. And the way it's infiltrated our culture is that it's very easy to make and it's cheap to make. And so what has been happening and what we've seen around the country is people who deal substances, drug dealers, have targeted particular populations that are already addicted to opioids like heroin and Oxycontin.
Okay.
And they started lacing heroin and Oxycontin pills, fake pills, with fentanyl because it saved them money. It was cheaper. And it's also highly addictive. It's 50 times stronger than heroin, 100 times stronger than morphine.
Wow.
So they were probably going to get more customers, but what they started finding out was that it also, if you're doing this in your basement and stamping fake pills, the likelihood of having a couple extra grains of fentanyl, that's the difference between life and death. So these are analgesics that are depressants and can stop the heart quickly.
Wow.
The way it's kind of come into, and I think this is the important part to focus on, into a lot of younger people's lives is fentanyl had, because it's easy to make and it's easy to substitute and stamp it into pills, there are people that are dealing substances that if a teenager decides they want to recreationally use Adderall, which is an ADHD medication, let's say they think it will help them stay up and study, or they've heard that Percocet will relieve pain, and they've had a sports injury and they ran out of their medication. So, and another one is like an anti-anxiety medication, so benzodiazepines. If they decide to seek those out, that in ways that are not prescribed for them, then, and this happens sometimes through social media, what has happened is, drug dealers will stamp those pills and contain fentanyl, and we've seen a 300% increase, I think, in teenage overdose deaths because these kids are not going to look for the drug fentanyl. It's showing up in the substances that they're maybe curious about or may just be using recreationally. So it's a different. I'm 50 years old. I graduated from college in 1996. I could not go through my teenage and young early 20 years the same way I did today. Like it's just a different world out there. And we do make an effort to not get overly focused on something like fentanyl because alcohol will kill a lot more people in the United States this year than fentanyl. However, we just don't know what's out there anymore. So it's a bit of the Wild West. So it's extreme caution is really important.
Right. But that's a really good point because I think one reason I ask about fentanyl is because I feel like you're hearing about it all the time and it's terrifying. But you're right. I mean, alcohol is so prevalent. So we got to wrap up, sadly. And I'm sad about that because I have a million questions. How do you keep the door open for conversations with your children? What is the best way as a parent to keep that door open?
Start having them early if you can. If you haven't been having them with a lot of frequency and your kid's in 8th grade or 10th grade or 12th grade or even in college, it is never too late to have those conversations. I'll just use the story of last night. One of the parents said that throughout their child's time from middle school to high school to college, like they've continued to have conversations regardless of what the choices the kid, their child makes throughout that time. Having conversations is kind of like home. That is home base for a child to return to their parents' voice, to remember like what the expectations are, that they are loved. They're not always easy conversations to have, but it can be the single thread that runs through a relationship between a parent and child. And though it does take some courage on both ends to have that conversation, doing so even in the worst of times, even if a child might be struggling with substance use is necessary. So I think the importance of having those conversations. The other thing to keep in mind is you don't need to be an expert. And so just trying to have conversations like with your child rather than just at your child can be really important, asking them questions and letting them talk for a while.
That's awesome. That is wonderful advice. Well, Will, I wish we had more time.
I know.
But I know you've got to get back to our students right now.
Yes.
So thank you for carving out this little bit of time to share with us. If parents want more resources, can I send them to your website?
Yep, soundcheckprevention.org. And you can always just email us. Our emails are on there. We're happy to kind of point you to more specific resources if there's anything on our website that doesn't answer anything. And we'd love to do a follow-up parent session. So anytime the parent community wants to gather around the table with some rapid fire Q&A, we'll set that up with the school.
Well, I personally would love that. So thank you so much for being here.
Great.
Thank you for
Thank
what
you
you're
all so
doing.
much.
And we appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thanks
we'll see you
for
again soon.
Yeah.